All right, Tage, let's start off looking at this Bengals Chiefs matchup from the view of the Bengals offense versus the Chiefs defense. Just from an overview perspective, obviously the Bengals come off a tough loss against the Patriots. I was kind of surprised. The offensive line, I thought, did a decent job, which was surprising. They didn't let up a ton of pressures there, but it felt like Joe Burrow was, I don't know, maybe he was just playing it a little bit too quick, where it felt like he was kind of tucking the ball a little bit maybe earlier than he had to. I thought that they actually had a few scheme wrinkles from that shotgun run game where Burrow's going to be in the gun. That's obviously his superpower, being able to kind of see everything, get guys in the right spots, and picking your one-on-one matchups. Of course, you don't have T. Higgins there. Jamar Chase kind of getting back into the flow of things. So overall, my concerns, I think, for the Bengals are a little bit lower than kind of how I first felt on Sunday, but I think they have some work to do. Tage, where do you want to start with the Bengals offense from a stats view?
I agree with you on their offensive line playing pretty well against the Patriots. They only allowed a pressure on 19% of Joe Burrow's dropbacks, which was the second best in the NFL last week. And they were also pretty good run blocking as well. They had the third highest success rate when they ran the ball. And I think everyone on the offensive line played pretty well, except for Trent Brown, who had a little bit of a down game, but you can still just account for him getting used to the offense as part of that. And they do have Amarius Mims there as their first round draft pick if needed, if the Trent Brown situation gets bad for them there. But the point that you bring up where you have Jamar Chase still kind of getting conditioned to playing at a high speed, like NFL games are, because of how much training camp he missed with his contract situation. And then no T. Higgins, I think, really showed up in this game. And if they are able to get both of them on the field in this game, I think that's such a big advantage for them, because we know how high the ceiling of their offense can reach when they have a healthy Joe Burrow throwing to both of those guys.
The Bengals just find ways to go 0-2 in September, or at least lose two games, not just start 0-2, but lose two games in September. The last 2 years, certainly they don't want to make it a third. I mean, we talk about every single position on the team. It really just comes down to what we see in Burrow, I think, because there were some examples where I thought that he could have let the ball loose and he didn't. And if you're going to be a team that really does heavily lean into your one-on-one situations, ball's got to be out when it's there. So I want to be on the lookout for that against the Chiefs defense that I think is really strong. And I was thinking about it like, if you're a Bengals fan and you see Joe Mixon just killing it with the Texans, how do you feel? I do think, Mixon has a different running style than I think what the Bengals need right now, where the Bengals are, I actually think have a fine running back room where you want to be running from shotgun, where Mixon is really, really good under center instead of that.
Yeah, I think that Zach Moss fits what they want out of their running back room pretty well, where he is a good running back. He showed up well in advanced stats last season, and he was mostly a late down back then, but he's also a player who has shown that he can expand his run game a little bit here as well. He generated 2.5 expected points added when running the ball against the Patriots. And that is a decent Patriots defense. So against a worse run defense like he's going to see against the Chiefs here, we might see a pretty big game out of him as he kind of has established himself in that RB1 spot for the Bengals.
Yeah, maybe a more than decent Patriots defense, and a defense that I think we both know is more than just decent, is this Chiefs defense that had a pretty good showing against the Ravens on opening day in week 1. I think that the Chiefs, they had some just fun wrinkles where you have players that are linebackers that you can now move this player onto the defensive line. You can shift some guys over. And if you look at the playbook sheets that teams will use, you have a run concept. It's drawn against one kind of defensive presentation, and then it's drawn against another defensive presentation. And I think that should make sense. But if you're switching your presentation kind of really quickly before the snap, now you're making the offensive line think, or we've talked a bunch about how can you find ways to make the quarterback think after the snap. Now I got, Leo Chanel running through my face as I'm trying to change my run block. I think that's a pretty cool thing that the Chiefs did, and I'm sure we'll continue to do. Tage, where do you want to start with the Chiefs defense?
I want to look at kind of the difference between where the Chiefs defense is at from a pass defense perspective versus a run defense perspective. And this was something that was talked about a lot when Todd Monken didn't have many design rushes for his running backs in the AFC Championship game, considering that the Chiefs run defense isn't that good and their pass defense is elite. And that really shows up in the stats where they had the third best EPA per pass allowed. And they were really good at defending the pass last year, but they had the 28th best EPA per rush against. So they were not good against the run. And a big part of this was their defensive line, especially Chris Jones. They had the highest sack rate in the league, the 12th highest pressure rate in the league. And then you had corners last year like L'Jarius Sneed and Trent McDuffie, who were both really good at taking away some of the better receiving options on the other side. And McDuffie did pretty well against the Ravens in his first game, kind of moving from inside to outside, only allowing 2 receptions for 22 yards. But they're still trying to figure out their corner options past him with Shamari Connor and Watson, and kind of just playing around with different combinations. So there is an opportunity for the Bengals in this game to kind of take advantage of a Chiefs defense that doesn't have to be good right now because they kind of know that they're going to make the playoffs, and that's the time that they really need to figure it out. And so as they kind of had this experimentation phase of their season, there is opportunity for them to be thrown against just because of those options in the secondary.
It certainly feels like the Chiefs they're afforded the opportunity to kind of play around and figure things out, where the Bengals, I don't know. I'm not sure if they're going to be afforded that same ability. Tej, I did want to ask you, you talk about the Chiefs numbers from last year. Of course, we only have 1 week of data, where there are a lot of examples in games last week where I'm looking at it and I'm like, is this team good, or is the other team maybe just not that good? And that can skew things. So how do you kind of mentally approach it when you're looking at the data and kind of balancing, look, we only have this 1 week of data, but it is, new players, new team, new situation, versus having, all of that sample from last year?
That's a great question. And when you look at projecting out units, once you have a week of new seasons data in there, you usually want to still include your prior of what that unit was like last year. And you would have already regressed that prior a little bit to league average, more on defense than on offense, just because of the stability of those sides of the ball year to year. And so if you have a defensive unit like the Chiefs, where they ranked last year and what kind of output they had from an EPA standpoint. You want to regress that to league average during the offseason, account for some of the changes that they made on the back end, like losing L'Jarius Sneed and maybe bumping them down a little bit more. And then also just considering that they looked pretty good against Baltimore for the most part, definitely let up some explosive plays, but that's going to happen when you play a good offense like they did. And so you kind of learned more about them in that game, but still are just factoring that in with what you already thought about them in the offseason.
Tej, let's move on to what we think maybe the best matchup for the Bengals offense is against the Chiefs defense. What are you thinking there?
I am still worried about the pass offense after what we saw last week, but I think that the run offense, the run game can be pretty good in this matchup where, again, the Bengals had the third highest success rate running the ball of any team last week. And we just talked about how the Chiefs run defense wasn't that good last year, and they didn't have a great game against a tough running opponent in the Ravens. And so Nick Bolton is someone who I think that the Bengals will want to target in this game from both a pass and a run standpoint. There's a lot of really good players on the Chiefs, and he's definitely someone who can play at a pretty high level, but just had a tough game in week 1 and is someone that the Bengals will want to force the ball towards a lot in this game. And so the Bengals can take advantage of this. They usually have a very high neutral situation pass rate. They like to pass the ball a lot, which makes sense based on their roster construction in the past. But in this game in particular, I think they're going to run the ball more than they usually do and try to take advantage of the matchup that they have there.
I think we'll be able to see it really early in the game, kind of what the Bengals approach is. Is it, as you say? I would kind of agree, because I think this running game can actually become something pretty positive in Cincinnati, where I was kind of happy with some of the scheme changes that I saw, where they're getting into more, you see that the puller kind of working across. Now I think they'll be able to get into situations where you're pulling a guard on play action, and now the linebacker's life is a lot harder there. So I maybe have a little bit more worry in that I would like a team from gun. If the Chiefs are playing like a ton of dime, for example, 4 down linemen, 1 linebacker, you can kind of attack those sorts of looks. But the Bengals don't have Chase and Higgins here. So if the Chiefs just want to devote a ton of resources to Jamar Chase, I mean, that's what I do. I'd really love to see kind of what the Bengals would do about that. Tej, let's move on to the Chiefs, kind of what we're thinking about what their best matchup is versus the Bengals offense.
The best matchup for the Chiefs is almost always going to be Chris Jones. But what was really interesting about how they used Chris Jones against the Ravens and because of their offensive tackle situation is he lined up at the edge position 42% of the time against Baltimore, which was a pretty big difference compared to his base rate of 18% that Next Gen Stats pointed out. So when you have that type of versatility from a pass rusher of his caliber, I think that Steve Spagnuolo will really lean into that in this game. And Trent Brown was someone who gave up 4 pressures on 38 pass blocking snaps. So I think they're going to test him pretty early and often in this game by putting Chris Jones on the edge because he showed that he can do that pretty well against Baltimore and probably will continue that in this game.
I always love when you see the examples of Chris Jones kind of getting out of his stance, and it looks like he's looking over to the other side of the defensive line and saying, "No, it's my turn to rush on that side." And he is such a weapon, obviously inside, but his ability to move to the outside and just have a ton of success, or just like line up like he's over the tackle, but he's really rushing over the guard, is fun. I'm excited to see the snaps that we get for Jamar Chase versus Trent McDuffie. You know, how much man coverage is it directly going to be? Maybe not a ton. Maybe it is a lot where if you're moving Chase around and then you decide, hey, let's just make sure that McDuffie is in that situation. I also want to see just how the yards after catch plays because the Bengals had a tough time getting yards after the catch. It didn't feel like they had yards after the catch particularly schemed up. It was a lot of, quick throws against the Patriots. It was a lot of just, I'm going to run 5 yards and turn around, kind of like you would call, I think you can call it uninspired. And the Chiefs seem pretty consistently like a defense that really wants to hit and really wants to tackle. So that is something I'm kind of monitoring a little bit in this one.
The Chase McDuffie matchup is going to be awesome to watch. And the really interesting thing about how Zach Taylor and the Bengals offensive coaching staff uses Jamar Chase is when he's outside, he has a pretty high target share just naturally because of the type of receiver that he is. But when they move him into the slot, his target share almost doubles. He gets a lot of targets. They really want to scheme up plays for him when he gets into the slot. And what makes this matchup unique against the Chiefs is Trent McDuffie is a player that can play both inside and outside because of what we saw from him last year and then early into this season. And so maybe he is someone who will travel with Chase into the slot, and those types of designed plays to Chase are harder for the Bengals offense to get to. But I'm sure that Zach Taylor has an answer for that on his end of how he wants to get McDuffie away from Chase and onto one of their other receivers.
Yeah, you can try and, you motion him around, see if McDuffie is going to go ahead and travel with that. You get into a bunch, you get into a stack, really anything to create some sort of friction where it's just causing the defense. You got to work after the snap just a little bit and kind of get through traffic there. And we talked about in that Patriots game versus the Bengals last week, just tons of short passes. Did you have anything on how the Chiefs usually deal with short passes?
The Chiefs are very good against short passes. When you look at under 5 air yards, they are all over those because they're a great tackling team. Like you mentioned, they rank top 5 in EPA allowed on short passes relative to the league last year. And they're also really good on deep passes over 15 air yards. They were top 3 in that as well. But the intermediate area of the field, when there's a pass between 5 and 15 air yards, that's where the Chiefs defense struggled last season. And I would wager that they would continue to struggle at it this season. They ranked 23rd in EPA per pass allowed in the intermediate area of the field. And this is an area that the Bengals offense has excelled at these past couple seasons. They've only ranked behind San Francisco at throwing to the intermediate area of the field. You think about where Joe Burrow can place the ball and where Chase and Higgins are really good at it. It makes a lot of intuitive sense that they're going to be good at there. So you're really hoping that the Bengals offense is able to attack that area because it's almost necessary for them to do that in this game to keep this game close.
It's so funny. You think about, hey, they're really good kind of on the deeper part of the field. They're really good on the shallow part of the field. I mean, you can't be good at all 3 levels. It's so hard because a defense, it's such a priority game where you're saying, hey, we are really trying to stop this kind of one thing. And every single defensive call has a weakness. I just think that's so important to remember because there is no perfect defense. There's never going to be a perfect defense call. The rules are just such that there's always something that's really difficult to do. Like when the Chiefs get into some of those kind of too high looks, I really just want to know, what does the Bengals game run game look like? Because the Chiefs have struggled at some time against those kind of, you see a puller, you see that power, that kind of counter game. And where last year, I think the Bengals certainly were kind of leaning into that inside zone, sort of just not basic, but what most teams are doing. It really felt like in week one, they took a concerted effort to changing that up, be a little bit more gap scheme in the run game. And hey, maybe it's a time where you can kind of take advantage of the Chiefs defense there.
That's a great point to bring up because the Bengals were primarily an inside zone team last year, but they'll need to lean more into their gap scheme runs this year because the Chiefs were not good at defending power and counter last year, as charted by FTN data. So if the Bengals are able to be more diverse in their run game, they can have a pretty good rushing attack in this game against the Chiefs. And I especially think when they go into 12 personnel, they can really be able to get into some of those run concepts that are gap scheme runs and take advantage of the personnel that the Chiefs have on their end and really just try to attack downhill as a rushing attack in this game.
Hey, so let's finish off this side of the ball just talking about Joe Burrow versus the blitz, because if the offensive line is really able to just, take care of your pass rush, one thought is, hey, let's send an extra rusher. Obviously, you have one less player in coverage. You're playing that weighing game. Where are we at on blitzing Joe Burrow?
Yeah, this will be really interesting to watch from Steve Spagnuolo's perspective in this game is if they're not able to get pressure with four, he should internally tell himself to avoid blitzing Joe Burrow in this game because Burrow has a massive jump in terms of both success rate and EPA when facing the blitz versus not facing the blitz. So Spags needs to figure out how to rush four, maybe even just rush five, and force them into quick passes. Joe Burrow was very quick to throw last week when looking at his time to throw, and the Chiefs are very good at defending quick passes. We just talked about how they're a very good tackling team, and they can be all over those types of plays. They were the second best team in terms of success rate allowed on passes that were 2.5 seconds or less last season. So if they can build a dome and force Burrow to get the ball out quickly without blitzing, they can have a really good day on defense. But if they're not able to get pressure with four and they start blitzing, I could see the Bengals offense scoring a decent amount of points in this game.
And you mentioned how, can you find a way to kind of create pressure where you're blitzing, where you're still in pass coverage? That's where that kind of sim pressure or the creeper kind of world comes in, where a lot of teams will drop out a defensive end and send a linebacker. The Chiefs will really be happy to send a nickel, especially when it's McDuffie. And again, they drop that defensive end away where you're still playing 7 players in pass coverage. You're still only rushing 4 players, but now you've changed who that fourth rusher is. So the quarterback has to work a little bit. The pass protection has to work a little bit. And if you can get a free rusher in any way, it just changes the game.
Yeah, that's really interesting to watch out for in this game. But when these defenses are running sim pressures, is there some sort of either advantage or disadvantage that they're gaining from dropping a player into coverage that is usually not used to playing coverage because of kind of like the scheme that they're running in this particular instance?
When you're running that, we think about you send the nickel, you drop the defensive end away. You're not asking the defensive end to play man coverage on Jamar Chase. So I do think that some teams will have the player literally drop to a spot on the field. So it's hey, your job is super easy. Some teams, they'll make it a little bit more difficult and be hey, you kind of have to match this person if he's running out. So it's really on a defensive coordinator to make it a little bit easier on that defensive end, where if it's a 2x2 set and it's kind of away from that passing strength where you usually line up the nickel, your dropout, oftentimes you're going to be over a tight end. And if that tight end is not a vertical threat, you feel kind of fine with it. And, the way Vic Fangio does it is he's blitzing, but that defense, and he'll call him a bonus hook dropper, where you're really just adding that player kind of onto a specific area, as opposed to expecting a ton of things from that player. So there's ways to look at it differently. I do think there's ways to expose it. I mentioned that kind of Cardinals game versus the Eagles a whole lot last year. But Tej, let's move on to the Chiefs offense versus the Bengals defense. The more I just think about it, I'm just continue to fall in love with the Chiefs offense, because we see so many more different iterations of the Mahomes offense, where of course we had the Tyreek Hill season last year. It felt like there just weren't any receivers, and now they have just different pieces where I think they're doing a good job. Obviously only after 1 week, but I think they will continue to do a good job of creating explosives from just high yards after catch opportunities between design and a little bit of personnel. Where Xavier Worthy, again, he didn't change anything about football last week, but he's going to have some fun opportunities. And obviously, Rashee Rice had a good game. Tej, where do you want to start with the Chiefs offense?
I'm right there with you. The Chiefs are going to probably pass a lot in this game, especially out of 11 personnel. Both of these teams like to pass, so we're going to see a lot of those in this game. And like you mentioned, low average at the target, high yards after catch is kind of what this Chiefs offense has been these past couple of years. It was a lot harder to do it last year with those receivers than they have this year, where you have Rashee Rice, who was a good player last year, but appears to already have taken a step up, especially on what he was able to do over the middle of the field against the Ravens. And then Xavier Worthy already looks pretty dynamic as a rookie, where he'll start to get more comfortable in the offense and really work his way up to maybe being the second receiving target or the wide receiver target in terms of target shares, as Hollywood Brown works his way back from injury as well. And so I think there'll be an occasional deep shot from this Chiefs offense, but it'll be a lot of just working in that 2 to 8 air yard range, and then just getting a lot of yards after catch when they do so. And they're going to use a lot of motion when getting into a lot of these pass plays. And I think that's going to benefit Xavier Worthy the most because of his size. And so I really am excited to look for him in this game on what types of motions he's used on, and how they end up getting him the ball on some designed situations.
Flipping it over to the Bengals defense, going through the Bengals defense versus the Patriots offense tape. Obviously, the Patriots offense is not going to be, explosive pass after explosive pass. They really were trying to, it felt like they were trying to shrink the game the way that they were running the ball. Obviously, the Bengals lose DJ Reader, and the film, it was good in parts. I thought that the Patriots did a really, really good job of getting, an extra lineman, or really getting heavy on the offensive line, kind of bumping everything down, get your running back to bounce outside to the cornerback, where it's just a tough matchup, particularly against a running back like Ramondre Stevens. But Lou Anarumo, he tried different things. It's not like the Patriots just stomped him, but if you can't tackle better, it's you're going to Kansas City. It's not even going to be close. What are you thinking on the Bengals defense side here?
The Bengals defense has had trouble with tackling, especially last season, and it was pretty uncharacteristic for them to not play well on defense last year. And you're just hoping for some regression to the mean this year. And Ramondre Stevenson did have a big game, especially with what he was able to do after contact when running the ball. And so that worries me a little bit about the Bengals run defense, and their pass defense let up a lot of explosive plays last year. So you're hoping to shore that with some of the additions that you brought in. But I really do think that Trey Hendrickson is the lone bright spot for this defense right now. And the rest of the defensive line just isn't that strong to me. So there are definitely a lot of opportunities to be had for the Chiefs offense in this game. Dax Hill was someone who struggled playing safety last year. He's moved to corner this year, and early results have looked decent, but it's still a new position for him, and something that we might see him be picked on in this game because of how the newness to playing a different position.
I mean, if you're starting a new position against the Chiefs, where outside of just the one-on-one player matchup, just the rules that you have to know when a player motions from inside to outside, how your whole entire defensive structure has to change when a player is kind of running across the field, or just using those different kind of rule breakers on offense is really, really hard. So as we get to thinking about some of the best matchups for the offense, it feels like you can kind of pick a lot of different ones. Maybe not even just the best match, but I just want to see how many times the Chiefs are able to get, a running back, whoever the running back is, obviously Isaiah Pacheco, on a cornerback in the run game. Where now, if I'm the Chiefs, look at the Bengals game and say, oh, they had this really big problem, I'm going to morph my whole entire game plan around it? No, I wouldn't necessarily do that. You're still going to play your style, but it is something that I think is of note, where you get condensed. You can bounce that running back out to the cornerbacks against the Bengals. And, it might just be that they're not going to have the best time tackling. Tej, where do you want to look for the best matchup for the offense here?
I'm with you on really just stretching the Bengals defense horizontally, but I think they'll do it in the pass game as well, where you have Cam Taylor-Britt, who ranked 96th in yards allowed per coverage snap last season, didn't have that good of a year. And so I think that Xavier Worthy or Hollywood Brown, one of those receivers that can really just work and win on the outside is going to be matched up against him pretty often in this game, and is going one of those guys is going to be someone that Mahomes looks to a lot as he's throwing the ball. And we didn't even mention Travis Kelce through all of this, where he should probably have a pretty big game as well, as long as he kind of works on more outbreaking routes, just because of the situation that the Bengals have with their outside starting corners.
Yeah, I think that the Bengals are going to play a ton of zone coverage. And when we think about how the defense is kind of going to deal with the offense, that certain types of zone coverage, I think, can prevent the Chiefs from having explosive plays. So I do want to see, can the Chiefs create some sort of explosive against that zone coverage, whether it's I'm trying to bait, that safety in one direction. Now I'm running Xavier Worthy right behind you. Or is it just constantly making those linebackers get, hung up trying to pass a route over? Tej, I don't know if you have any thoughts from the defensive end here. I don't know, maybe something they can try and do to help out against the Chiefs offense.
There's really not much that the Bengals can do in this game to help out against the Chiefs offense. It's the same story as I would give to any underdog. I think the Bengals are around like a 5.5 point underdog in this game as we're recording here, where you just really want to lean into the high variance things that you can do on defense. Really mixing up how many pass rushers you're sending, being aggressive, in terms of trying to create turnovers, even if you have to let up a couple extra yards to do so because you're trying to jump an interception or force a fumble. Like, I think all of those things as an underdog is how you play. And you especially want to do that against Kansas City, where they can just keep coming back and attacking you. And so really just trying to get turnovers or causing them to make mistakes early is like kind of the only thing that you can do.
Yeah, and I think from just like a player standpoint, you can be excited about some Mike Hilton, just like on Rashi Rice, just kind of how those snaps go from one view or the other. I always like when you have players that are good in their rotation. Any other kind of stuff you want to talk about here before we finish here? Anything with quick passes? I know that the Bengals defense is going to have to really, really figure out tackling. I'm glad you mentioned pushing them horizontal. Obviously, I talked about it in the run game. I didn't think about it as much in the pass game, but I think the Chiefs are going to be pretty happy to do that.
Yeah, I do think that there will be a lot of quick passes from the Chiefs in this game, where the Bengals ranked 30th in success rate allowed on passes under 2.5 seconds last year. So can expect a decent amount of screens or just rushy rice slant routes that are basically a cheat code right now. And I also think that Andy Reid will use a lot of motion in this game on pass plays. The Bengals were actually decent. When there was motion on design runs last year, they were better than their average on all plays, but they were not good when there was motion on pass plays. And so the Chiefs just use a lot of motion naturally and did so last week as well, including these past couple seasons. So I bet that they'll spam it in this game. And if they are really leaning into both of those things, the motion and the quick passing, they could really have a blow up game in this matchup where they're able to